Welcome back to Pod of the Century. Galen Clavio, Daniel Eves joining you here on this inaugural Matchday episode of the podcast as we react to the first match of World Cup 2022. And we'll talk about what we saw in that match and what it might mean for later games in that group, as we've only got one game today. We'll be doing this every time there's a match day for this entire tournament. So be sure to plan on tuning in. We'll always be going live pretty much right after that last game ends, or at least within 30 minutes of it. So today it's early, and then later on, it's obviously going to be a bit later on in the day, as the last games are really not going to start until 2 Eastern, which means they're not going to end until about 4:15. So be sure to subscribe to us here on the IU Sports Media YouTube channel. You can also subscribe on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts by just searching Pod of the Century. Daniel, happy Thanksgiving break. It's good to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm excited that the World Cup is now finally upon us. It's obviously weird timing, but I am grateful that we get to witness the beautiful spectacle that is the world's game on the biggest stage.
Yeah, it's an awkward thing because I think there's certainly FIFA has not helped increase enthusiasm for the World Cup with all of the nonsense that's been coming out of them over the course of the last couple of days. And certainly some of the injury news. The big one yesterday, of course, Karim Benzema ruled out for the tournament, which is a big blow to France's hopes. But, you know, with all of that and with kind of just the lack of overall excitement, I think in a lot of corners, I mean, the BBC didn't even show the opening ceremonies. They instead showed a very sobering video covering some of the concerns and controversies surrounding the World Cup. So it's really been an awkward start, but it is, in one sense, nice to just kind of get the games underway, not to minimize any of the other items, but it is something that gives us something else to talk about. And when you reduce it to, you know, what a lot of people want to see, which is the tournament itself, I know that is a focus for a lot of people, not putting aside the other issues, but certainly keeping them in mind, but also kind of getting to the football, as we would say. So, yeah, it's been an interesting week, to say the least.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's nice to finally have some positivity surrounding it, because we've seen a whole lot of negativity surrounding the sport, which is just sad to see, really, because it's such a wonderful thing. It's such an amazing thing that the world comes together to watch this. People from all around the world watch and play in a tournament, which is unlike many other sports at all. So it's really nice to see the game actually hit the pitch. But yes, of course, we can't minimize the issues, and those still need to be spoken about and hopefully fixed.
Well, let's dive into what we've got here for this first game of the World Cup. Qatar versus Ecuador. Daniel, I got to be honest. I honestly was looking at this Qatar team, and I was like, I think this team's a bit underrated. Asian Cup champions. They played pretty well in the Gold Cup. They certainly don't have a lot of name brand players, but I figured if they were going to be in this World Cup and host it, they might have some advantages over some of the other squads. And Ecuador, very young squad, certainly with some talented players, but has not necessarily fared particularly well on the international stage, at least not in the World Cup. And man, so far my predictions don't look very good, because Qatar looked terrible in this first match and Ecuador looked totally dominant. A 2-0 victory for Ecuador. What were your overall takeaways from this match?
Yeah, I think there was a whole lot of unexpectedness surrounding this Qatar team. No one really knew much about them. They don't have many players at all playing outside of Qatari domestic leagues. So it's really hard to compare them to any other team. But there was a lot of talk about their chemistry, about how they've played together for so long. Their coach has been there for 16 years, has coached them since they were extremely young. So there was that kind of aspect, which you thought maybe on home turf they could get a result. But Ecuador is a very good team. Ecuador is a very underrated team. I mean, coming fourth in the South American qualifiers in probably the hardest confederation on average out of any footballing confederation, that's no fluke. They are a very solid team. They have players playing in Premier League, playing in La Liga. And I think immediately, as soon as the whistle blew, Qatar looked scared. It was a mess those first few minutes. And obviously the offside goal in the 3rd minute is a major talking point. But I think that really showed how the game was going to go on and how Qatar's tournament was going to go on, because they looked frantic. They couldn't hold the ball. They couldn't string together more than 3 passes. And Ecuador just looked calm, composed. They've played against the big names, and they're ready to walk over Qatar.
Yeah, you look at the stats from this game, and it's pretty one-sided. I mean, Ecuador with a little bit more possession, but 6 shots on the game, 3 shots on frame. 2 of those end up going for goal. And Qatar really didn't threaten at all. They had 1 touch in the box in the first half, and it was the last touch of the first half. And it was, I will say, I wouldn't have been shocked if that had gone in, because we see those in the World Cup sometimes where like it's entirely the run of play is the opposite direction, and then someone nicks a goal off of almost an accidental pass in the dying embers of things, and that leads to maybe a revitalization of the team. And to be fair, I thought Qatar played better in the second half than they did in the first. You mentioned they looked very scared in that first half. That second half, they really did seem to rein it in a bit. They focused a little bit more on some level of possession and control and not committing dumb fouls. And I think the big thing for them really was just they kept getting sliced open consistently by Ecuador in their defensive line during that first half. And that really didn't happen to the same degree. Ecuador did have some really nice moments of possession and passing, and they were able to get Qatar off center, but it was a different kind of energy than what we saw in the first half, where the Qataris just looked basically almost entirely unorganized.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we saw that Ecuador have some serious talent. Enner Valencia, obviously, he's not a new name. He's played in Europe. He has almost 100 caps in England, playing for West Ham and Everton, and he plays for Fenerbahce now, one of the big name Turkish clubs. And he was clinical. I mean, he could have had 3 goals if the offside goal stood, and he looked calm and composed when taking the penalty. That header was absolute top draw. That's not an easy header at all, and he was in the right place at the right time for the offside goal. And then it's not just the starting 11. They've got Sarmiento coming off the bench. He's a very young talent for Brighton in the Premier League, who are now a top 10 club in the Premier League, and they have 2 other Brighton players, the left back Estupinian and Moises Caicedo at centre mid. They just looked calm, composed, and ready to be there, whereas Qatar just did not look prepared at all. I think we could see Ecuador actually give the Netherlands a game, and certainly if Sadio Mane is out, I think Ecuador will probably be favourites going into the Senegal game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, when I think about both of these teams today and what the implications of this game were, right? Because there's not a whole lot else to talk about with the game itself. I mean, it was there weren't a lot of storylines other than, wow, Qatar's got a lot of work to do if they want to get a point out of this group, let alone advance. And now you look at this Ecuador squad, and I think the big thing that I come out of this group with right now, or at least out of this game with, is maybe we've underrated them as a potential, group winner. I don't know what we're going to see out of the Netherlands. It's not the same Netherlands team that we're used to seeing. And Ecuador now has a game under their belt. They have a 2-0 victory, and they're going to be able to go through the rest of the stage kind of knowing they've got a cushion that they can work with. Clearly, they've got a lot of really skilled, talented players, and they did not look scared at all. So I'm curious now if maybe they're a little closer to being the favorite simply because they've got that under their belt. And I think Qatar is going to have at least one game where they play really well at home. And now that's either going to be against Senegal or against the Netherlands. I don't know. What are your thoughts right now on where they sit in relation to the Dutch?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think it shows that having that first game against the weakest team in your group can be a huge benefit. It gives you that cushion, as you said, and it takes a weight off your shoulders going into these next games. They can go into the Netherlands game knowing that they don't particularly need 3 points. If they'd only got a point off Qatar, then they go into that Netherlands game thinking we might need more than a draw here. And then you play more open. You don't play your typical tactical style. And you probably go into a game against the Netherlands, who are clearly a star-studded side, and lose that one. But now you've got 3 points behind you. You can go into the Senegal game on a high. You could win that without Sadio Mane playing against your opponents. And then you can go into that Netherlands game as well. And you've got a lot of cushion. You can go into that and show your talent. And you should probably get through the group. And I think Senegal are probably wary now of Ecuador, especially with Sadio Mane out. And they're going to have to look at that and figure out what they can exploit from that Ecuador side.
Yeah, this is where, and I was talking about this on the other preview podcast that I did for the World Cup, but this is where the order of the games really does make a big difference. And, you know, to some degree, the fact that Ecuador gets to sandwich the game against the Dutch with the games against the second tier competition in this group really helps them out, because it really, at this point, then they can waltz into that game knowing exactly what they're going to need to do, essentially based upon what happens with the Netherlands in the Senegal game. And then if Ecuador can nick a point off of the Dutch in that game, I think that, when is that game coming up? I think that game is on Friday of this week. That's a really nice lead in all of a sudden for that USA-England game that's going to happen immediately afterwards. For Qatar, I mean, I get, do you see a pathway where they could potentially still contend for getting out of the group, or is that dream dead at this point, you think?
I think it's relatively dead. I think they would have to beat Senegal, obviously, and probably beat Senegal by a couple goals, because they're going to need goal difference to nullify their 2-0 loss this morning. But that's such a long shot. After seeing them play against Ecuador this morning, they just did not look anywhere near the level of competition that they're going to need to be at to compete with the likes of Netherlands and Senegal. So I believe that's their tournament over. For sure.
Yeah, this was one of those that Ecuador could probably afford to draw or lose, because they would find, I think they still had work that they could do moving forward, but this was a must win essentially for Qatar, or at least a game where they had to get a point, and neither of those things happened. So anything else from today that you wanted to try? The one weird thing, and this was noted both in, I think, one of the live blogs, I think the Guardian blog, but it was also even mentioned on the Fox broadcast, was at the second half, like 2/3 of the fans just left. There were huge tracks of empty seats. A friend of mine messaged me and said, why does it sound like a supermarket in there? Just like this really sterile atmosphere, except for the Ecuadorian fans who were having the time of their lives in that one corner of the stadium. That it's weird. I mean, I'm not shocked that they would put a bunch of fans in there at the beginning to make the stadium look full, but I was hoping that wouldn't be the outcome of things, and that we would have like a relatively full stadiums of fans that were interested, but that doesn't bode well for the rest of the tournament.
Yeah, and I think it should take nothing away from the Ecuadorian fans, as you said, because South American fans, especially Ecuadorian fans, travel tremendously, and they were making a ton of noise. You could hear their Spanish songs over the broadcast. But yeah, it was an odd spectacle to see that. Don't want to make too many assumptions, but you wonder if there's some national pride part of that, seeing their team kind of get walked over by Ecuador, who the fans maybe came in expecting a result out of that, and to see them not really get a single clear-cut chance. Maybe they just had enough and they wanted to head out. Who knows, really? That could just be a cultural, that's the way they approach sporting events. But it was interesting to see. I hope going forward we see more full stadiums throughout the 90 minutes, because it is the biggest event in the sport, and we should see full stadiums no matter what.
Well, tomorrow we've got some pretty intriguing games, 3 of them coming up of importance and interest to both you and me. England, Iran to start off Group B play at 8 a.m., then Senegal, Netherlands at 11, and then USA, Wales going to be kicking off at 2. Any big items that you're really looking for out of, let's say, the 2 Group B games, England, Iran, or USA, Wales?
I think the big one in the England-Iran game is if England don't get the 3 points, and if England do get the 3 points, but it wasn't very convincing, I think people will post major question marks on the England side, who are clearly in not a great run of form. And then in terms of the USA-Wales game, USA could really do with 3 points in that game. I think that would be a big statement for the Stars and Stripes. And I think if they can go in and get 3 points from Wales to start the group, that will really set them off on the front foot going into this tournament and hopefully send them through into the knockouts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I think, much like this was kind of you had to get at least a point if you were either Qatar or Ecuador. It feels that way for USA Wales tomorrow, and maybe even more important for one of those, either of those teams, if they have any hope of getting through, they need to get the full 3 points because they're going to need it as they progress through the rest of that group. I am interested with England, Iran, like what the English attitude looks like out on the pitch, and also what Iran looks like. Because, that's been probably the big question mark here. How much is Iran really going to be in this from a mental and emotional perspective, given what's going on back within their borders? So yeah, a lot of interesting storylines. And I think at this point, as we saw today, it's really hard to predict how these teams are going to look when they hit the pitch, because you just can't predict what energy they're going to be bringing. And I don't think anybody that can claim that they know at this point.
Yeah, no, 100% no. I think friendly internationals and even to a certain extent the UEFA Nations League or even World Cup qualifiers just don't align with World Cup play. It's a whole different ballgame once it comes to it. Players step up, other players fade away. And you see certain nations are extremely organized, and they will get results in games you didn't expect them to get results against teams which have extreme amounts of talent. And we may see England step up. They've played well in recent tournaments. We've finalists in the last Euros and semi-finalists in the last World Cup. But they may fade away. And that's something that you can kind of pick up on the early games. And we did that this morning. We realized Qatar faded away from the big stage, whereas Ecuador stepped up to it. Yeah. So we'll see if Iran can step up to it. They have a few secret weapons. Their goalkeeper can throw it practically the length of the pitch. So that could be used on the counter-attack. But other than that, I think everyone does expect England to win that game. So we will see. It's you can't make too many assumptions with the World Cup. There's a lot of unknown.
Bright and early here in the U.S., 8 a.m. Eastern, 5 a.m. Pacific for those of you living out there, and should be fun. We'll keep our eyes on it, and we'll be back tomorrow at about 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon to recap what we see in this game and all of the games that are taking place tomorrow. Daniel, great talking to you. Looking forward to more of these as we go through the tournament, and we will reconvene soon.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks to all you folks for listening in. This has been Pod of the Century as we do match day recaps of everything going on in the World Cup during the 2022 Qatar tournament. For Daniel, I'm Galen. Thanks for watching or listening, as the case may be. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.